Here. So just to introduce a little bit about our products and services, so I'm sure some of you are already familiar with what we do and what we provide, but CSO Education Group, essentially we provide both online and in-person study abroad opportunities that are typically 1 to 2 months. So if you are currently in undergraduate level university pursuing a bachelor's degree, this is something that might interest you. We do provide scholarships to kind of help offset costs, but you can complete some of your courses with us during the summertime and the fall time and be able to have those credits transferred back to your degree at your home university. We have lots of partner universities in many places around the world. Feel free to check out our website and you'll be able to see all the different destinations that we provide. We also provide virtual faculty-led programs. One of our upcoming programs is going to be the entrepreneurship program, which will be 4 weeks. If you are interested in that, feel free to reach out and we'd love to share more information with you on that. And in addition to this, we also provide various master's programs, so like a MBA degree or other master's types of programs that you can also enroll in and receive scholarships towards as well. We do provide financial aid where it's needed, and we also provide academic support through tutoring and through various professor support groups. And there's our website here, so please feel free to check it out. And we'd love to hear back from you guys. So please consider joining any one of our social media outlets. There's our email address in case you have questions about any of our programs or services. And we also have here a lot of different group options in case you want to join those. So please feel free to take a picture of that if this interests you, and we'd love to hear from you and connect with you. Now, to introduce our guest speaker, which I'm sure all of you guys are excited to hear from. So Dr. Karim Achab holds a PhD in linguistics from the University of Ottawa. Currently, Dr. Achab is a part-time professor of linguistics and French at the University of Ottawa. He is also a learning advisor from the Government of Canada. He has successfully published and presented numerous academic research pieces in both English and French. So welcome again, and I hope you all enjoyed today's webinar.
And thank you, Shane. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm starting to share the screen, and hopefully everybody will see it. Can you confirm, Esther and Shane?
Yes.
There?
Yes.
All right. So this topic, language subjectivity, is a huge topic. Now everything we touch is a big topic because people have been, and specialists have been working on that for years. This is why in 30 or 20 minutes, I cannot cover everything. And I have chosen to target the original idea of subjectivity as it was put by Benveniste, which we're going to see in more detail shortly. So let's see how this is going to unfold. So I will touch up on a few points, like what is language subjectivity? We're going to define that. And then I will recall the theoretical background of this topic. And again, it will be related to the original ideas suggested by Émile Benveniste. And then how the subjectivity is expressed through specific languages. Actually, I'm not going to delve into that. We will not have enough time. And then end with the question why subjectivity is important in linguistic studies. And at the end, a link will be made with generative linguistics, as it is now the mainstream school of linguistics, especially in North America. So how is language subjectivity defined? It refers to aspects of language use always from the perspective of the subject. Now, of course, including space orientation. Later, after Benveniste had worked on that, then it was extended to include opinions, the expression of opinions, judgments, evaluation, speculation, anything that we can have from the perspective of the subject. What this means, what does the subject mean here is the person who is doing the evaluation, it's the person who is speaking. So we'll get into that. The relation between subjectivity and the subject is very tight, and you will see that subjectivity does not apply to every subject. We'll see this difference shortly. Let me give you some elements from the theoretical background. Emile Benveniste lived his life between 1902 and 1976. And in order to understand his idea, we have to recall the mainstream ideas, dominating ideas at that time. One of the fields that was very taken at that time was psychoanalysis and the relation between psychoanalysis and linguistics. We know that if we read Sigmund Freud, for example, his psychoanalysis was based on language, and it has always been so. Psychoanalysis is talking with patients. So you have a specialist who talks with a patient, and hopefully at some point they will grasp what's happening in the subconscious of the patient, and then they will get to the patient to get in touch with some elements of his life that he did not consider, that he had not considered. And of course, psychoanalysis then is not the same. The judgment over psychoanalysis then at that time has nothing to do with our judgment of psychoanalysis today. Today, this discipline is almost extinct, actually completely extinct in North America. Almost in Europe, and there are a few, of course, specialists and especially novelists or multidisciplinary people who are still considering those ideas. But again, it is cyclic. Life is like this. You have one field, one domain, which is over-investigated, and then at some point, all those ideas from that domain were transferred to something else, to a new field. And then that field is being criticized and negatively criticized because they lack some elements, like psychoanalysis, for instance, was very criticized at that time as clinical psychology or behaviorist psychology was gaining ground. And of course, as it happens in academic areas, it is also a matter of who is going to get the funds from the government and from the institutions who are funding scientific research. So they put some criteria, like you have to prove something if you want that field or that discipline to survive. So how can you prove that psychoanalysis is something that works? It's different because you can do more in this with clinical psychology than with psychoanalysis. So students among you who are in these areas will understand very well this conflict between these topics. And also it's also getting to linguistics. Linguistics at some point, one field was, one kind of school was dominating, structuralism in Europe and North America, and then functionalism with André Martinet in France and some parts of Europe. And then you have the generative linguistics or transformational linguistics, which gain momentum. And now we do not know what's going to happen to transformational linguistics like in the coming few years. And we do not know whether psychoanalysis will make a comeback, a strong comeback, because, well, it is the end of a cycle. And we know that once we have put something in a drawer, at some point we get back to it and say, hey, these guys expressed very interesting ideas, and now it's time to get back to those. So this is what I can say on the the link or the relation between linguistics and psychoanalysis. As psychoanalysis was weakened, the link between linguistics and psychoanalysis was weakened also. Now, of course, all those ideas was or have been rephrased or reformulated within these new disciplines. And generative linguistics also took much of that, as we are going to see. So who were those people who were in touch or working or interested by the relation between psychoanalysis and linguistics? Of course, Sigmund Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis. And then you have Carl Gustav Jung, who was one of his colleagues, actually one of his students, and then a colleague, and then they split because they had different views even on the matter of psychoanalysis. I'm not going to delve into the details regarding the difference or the conflict between Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung, but very interesting to read. And from these are psychoanalysts. Then we had linguists like Ferdinand de Saussure, who is the founder of structuralism, actually. And as you can see, the periods when they lived, they almost lived together, like Saussure 1857 to 1913. And then you have Jacques Lacan also in France as a psychoanalyst, 1901, 1981, Jacques Derrida 1930 and 2004. And of course, some have been or were students of others, and then this is how knowledge was transferred until today. So these two, Ferdinand de Saussure and Benveniste, 1902-1976, were those who put forward this idea of subjectivity. Actually, if we mention subjectivity, it was Emile Benveniste, but Emile Benveniste took also ideas, shared ideas with Ferdinand de Saussure, or took many ideas from Ferdinand de Saussure. We do not reinvent the wheel, as you know. So the relation between psychoanalysis and the study of languages, or the place of language in psychoanalysis, was very tight. I mentioned Saussure, Ferdinand de Saussure. What is relevant? Everything, of course, he wrote was relevant, but directly to subjectivity is the difference he made between, in French, between langue, langage, and parole. So these words were translated in English because in English for langue et langage, it's the same, it's language. So sometimes they translate langue with tongue, as in my mother tongue, for example, or someone mother's tongue. We don't say mother tongue, well, it means native language. And then parole, word, but it was rather translated by utterance. When you utter not only a word, but it can be a word, it can be a few words. So these are very relevant to the idea of subjectivity, as we're going to see. Now, if we consider the vocabulary that was used by these linguists, you can see that they were very influenced by the analysts, like psyche in English. So psyche is the idea of psyche, or psychism, is the unification between the self, the aware self, and the unconscious, so the conscious part and the unconscious part of it. And Benveniste, when he was expressing his ideas, actually, he mentioned this, like psyche, psychism in French. So why did he need to say psyche instead of just saying ego, or the idea of self, or le moi, as it was also translated in. So the idea is that there are three parts. There is one which is unconscious, we are unconscious about. And then there is this ego, we are conscious about it, we are aware of it. Those are the things that we express every day, what we want to do, where we want to go. This is the self. This is the will, this is the what we want. We are all aware of this. But psychoanalysts worked on something, on the subject inside the self or the self inside the subject, rather, of which we were not aware. So this is the idea of Sigmund Freud when he started. So he was talking to patients, as I said at the beginning, in order to help them to get in touch with elements of their lives they were not aware of. So this is the unconscious. So just to stress the idea that even in the vocabulary used by Ferdinand de Saussure and especially Benveniste, you can find vocabulary inspired by psychoanalysis, and vice versa. Also, those who were working on language, the relation between, or the role of language in our lives or in our psyche or our psychology, they also wanted to know what linguists were saying regarding this. So you have also Sigmund Freud and Gustav Jung, who read a lot about linguists. So there was this interaction between psychoanalysis or psychoanalysts and linguists at that time. Yeah, I mentioned that Lacan, for example, is one of those who used the word subject in the linguistic, with the linguistic meaning, in order to refer to some parts or one part of the self. Still with the theoretical background, so I mentioned that parole, which is translated as utterance, for Benveniste, it was the means of communication, the way of actualizing the language. So Benveniste was saying that language was or is something else than what we think. Like when we speak languages, so this is how it started. When we speak languages, we do not refer to the language. We are referring to a tool or a means that actualizes the language. And this is where the difference in the between the French terms or words langue et langage et parole is relevant. So then there was the idea of a faculty of language as a cognitive function and the language that we speak. Now, even in transformational or generative linguistics, there is this difference today. You have internal language and you have external languages. So external languages are those which we are learning or we are using to speak or to talk. And we have our internal language, which is, some say that it was innate. That's the idea underlying Chomsky's claim, like inneism, like not something that we learned, but something that was innate. So the ability to actualize belongs to the language. So there is a difference between actualizing a language, which means basically expressing our internal language using external languages. So this ability to actualize or to express this language belongs to itself, to the language faculty, which is a cognitive function in our brain. So some say, like, if you read about universals in linguistics, there are some universals, they were there, we are born with. That's the idea underlying, for example, transformational linguistics. Now, how can we find that biologically? We are not there yet. And I'm wondering if someday we will get there. So Steven Pinker worked a lot on this, the relation between biology and the cognitive functions. He spent his whole life investigating this relation between biology. So if there is anyone to read regarding this link, between biology and the faculty of the language faculty as a cognitive function, then read Pinker, like, for example, his Blank Slate. All his books were about this idea or this relation. Now, when we say subject, there are many subjects. So we are not talking, what do we mean by subject? Like, do we mean grammatical subject, including expletive subject? Like, for example, if I say it rains, there is no subject there, no semantic subject. Like, if it rains, this it is an expletive. It doesn't have any semantic content. Like when I say it appears to me that, this it does not have semantic content, but it is still a grammatical subject. Why? Because there is a principle requiring that sentences must have a subject. What does that mean? It means there is a spot, there is a place in the structure which has to be filled or has to be delimited. So the sentence has to be delimited from the left edge or right edge, depending on how you write. So these edges have to be filled. Like you need an object if the verb requires. If the verb is transitive, you need an object. This means you have the right edge which has to be delimited. And all the object is optional, but subjects, grammatical subjects, are mandatory. So this is the idea of a grammatical subject, which has nothing to do with the subject that is related to subjectivity. So the first thing to do now is to keep in mind that subjectivity does not have anything to do with grammatical subject. And you will even be surprised when we get to compare pronouns, for example, she or he, third person is a subject, it can be a subject, but it is not related to subjectivity. Let me anticipate by telling you that subjectivity is only related to I, the pronouns I, which also generated the possibility of having you. And if you paid attention, and you as a subject, even if we are two here talking, I is a subject, and you is also a subject. So if you paid attention to the flyer that was devised by those who are running this program, and thank you very much for that flyer, for that poster, you will see that many languages were used in order to write the sentence, I love you. So you have you there, which is a grammatical object, but which is a subject from this subjectivity perspective. So a grammatical object can be a subject from this subjectivity perspective. So this difference is very important between grammatical subjects or grammatical objects and the subjectivity or the subjects encoded in the subjectivity we are talking about. The other one is the psychological self and ego. This comes from psychoanalysis, and this is why I spent some time talking about psychoanalysis at the beginning in order to highlight the influence of psychoanalysis at that time. So psychological self or ego is part of this, is related to this subjectivity. And of course, most importantly, the subject that is related to the utterance. Who is doing the utterance? Who is uttering the words? So if I say, I am going there, I'm talking about myself and I'm uttering those words. But if I say, she is going there, we lose this connection between the subject who is uttering the sentence and the subject who is going there. So here in a sentence that has she or he as a subject, as a grammatical subject, we'll have two subjects actually. And only one is related to this subjectivity, it's I. So if you hear the sentence, she's going there, there is no I, first person, in the sentence. But I am the one who is uttering the sentence. And this sentence does not require or does not encode any judgment, any evaluation, or any anything from my perspective. I'm just giving information, but I can add some elements or some facts which may be judgmental. So the grammatical subject here, she is going there. The grammatical subject, she, does not have anything to do with the subjective perspective. The subjective perspective is mine, is the one who is uttering the sentence. And this is why I is always present in sentences, even if linguistically or grammatically, it is not encoded in there. All right. So this is what subjectivity refers to essentially. Now, Benvenist's definition of subjectivity, of course, goes beyond this linguistic definition because he was relating subjectivity to the origin of language. As we are going to see, where does language come from? This question has been around, and of course, every period favored one school of thought. And in those days, it was this, it comes from the faculty of language. It was innate. And then, okay, it was innate. And then how is it actualized? How is it internalized? How do we learn a language? So we were moving from the innate to the cultural or the learned little by little. And now these two options have always been around. One was innate and the other one was acquired. So in generative grammar, for example, subject is very important. That was what was expressed in the idea of projection principle or extended projection principle. I mentioned this at the beginning. Maybe I did not use this terminology, but when I said that there is a principle that requires every sentence to be delimited from the left edge or the right edge, depending on when you write the sentence, whether you write from right to left or from left to right. This is a principle that was expressed in generative grammar. So we are not talking about subjectivity, we are talking about subjecthood. So this term is important because we need to know which subject we are referring to and whether we are talking about the subject that is related to subjectivity, or we are talking about the subject that is related to subjecthood, which is just a grammatical subject. So it is not also the idea of opposing an object with a subject, because as I mentioned earlier, in the sentence, I love you, you have both I and you are subjective here. Although the I is dominating, is higher than the subjectivity, is higher than the that of the object. But just to highlight the fact that it's not the contrast between subject and object. It is the contrast between who is able to encode something or add something like judgment, for example, the perspective, whose perspective is it? So of course here we have a coincidence between the object, the grammatical object, which is you, and also the subjectivity subject, which is I, both I and you. So this is a little bit weird because we are saying that object is not an object, it is a subject. Because we are not talking about grammatical subject. So psychological self, this is another definition of subjecthood, subjectivity, and subject of the utterance, as I mentioned earlier. So these are Benvenist's definition. As you can see, for the psychological self, it goes way, way beyond just linguistics or a sentence, whether it is a word or utterance or language, or call it whatever you want. Psychological self is definitely something that goes beyond and which steps into psychoanalysis or psychology. We're still in subjectivity as viewed by Benveniste, this linguist who introduced the idea. So one of the elements or the criteria he put forward, the speaker's ability to position as a subject. So as soon as the speaker starts to speak, then he is or she is already a subject. And this is why when I mentioned a sentence with the third person, like, she's going there, it is the subject who is uttering the sentence, who is positioning here as a subject. And we are not talking about she, which remains a grammatical subject. It remains a grammatical subject from the grammatical linguistic perspective, but it becomes object from the subjectivity perspective. Like if I'm saying she's going there, I'm saying something about she or about her, about this subject who is going there. Because I'm saying something about her, I would rather use she because she is the object and her is the grammatical object. Because I'm saying something about she, so she is the object here with respect to subjectivity. So I am saying something, and when we are saying something, we are the subject, and the thing we are saying is the object, and the person we are saying something about is also the object. It is indirect object, but it is still the object. So he says that subjectivity is not defined by how one feels to be himself or herself. So this has nothing to do with being aware of how you feel. It is not, subjectivity is not about that. But it is a psychic unity, unité psychique. And this comes from psychoanalysis, which transcends the totality of the lived experiences, which it assembles. So this is my translation is mine, because obviously Benveniste, being French, wrote his work in French, and which ensures the permanence of consciousness. So you did something years ago, you still remember that you did it, and it's you who did it, not someone else. So these are different experiences, and we may not be aware or remember everything we did, but we are still the subject of those facts. Now, if we don't remember them, it means they are located somewhere else than the subject, what the subject is aware of. So this is why this psychic unity is used. This is, of course, the idea of Freud, Sigmund Freud, and later Carl Jung. Now, what is the relation between language and this psychic unity? Benveniste was saying that it is the emergence of a fundamental property of language. This is where language comes from. It comes from the awareness of positioning yourself as a subject. We're going back to, I will get back to this in more detail shortly. Let's just continue listing the criteria or some ideas that Benveniste put forward. So at the end, he concluded that subjectivity was determined by the linguistic status of person. Now, person, if I say she's going there, is she a person? Of course. But to Benveniste, it is not, because he was relating person to this subjectivity. So subjectivity yields person or related to person. And this feature now, person which is encoded in I, because I am the one who is uttering the sentence, is how the language was born. So we will get back to this shortly, how the origin of language. So how did Benveniste get to the conclusion that once you are aware of your subjectivity, and then you know the power of I, and you can contrast I with you, because you can only say I if you are talking to someone else. So when you consider, you cannot say I if there is nobody you are talking to, all right? If I say I am hungry, I'm expressing something to someone. Now, even if I'm expressing it to myself, it means this is called split. It means the idea of I'm talking to myself. So there are two selves. There's the one which we are aware of, the one who is talking, and that there is the other one to whom we are talking, but we are not aware of. So sometimes we say, I'm just thinking out loud. but in reality, it is somewhere, there is someone inside we are talking to. And of course, if you say there is someone in me I'm talking to, everybody will consider you as crazy. But if you are saying, oh, I'm just thinking out loud, that's fine, that works. But the idea is basically the same. Like you are talking to yourself, whether you say you are talking to someone inside yourself or whether you are thinking out loud, it doesn't matter. The idea, the fact is, it remains the same, it doesn't change. So here's a quote from Benveniste. Again, at the end, I will, it is the book that he wrote in 1958, which is called Problème de linguistique générale, in 2 volumes. So the translation is mine again. It is in and through language that man is made subject. Well, that's a person, or these are the words he used in French. Of course, most of the vocabulary when we come to the contrasting man and woman or male and female becomes problematic today. It was not the case when Benveniste wrote this. So language that man is made subject. So just in this sentence, you can see the main idea of or behind Benveniste's claims. It is in and through language that man is made subject. Without a language, there is no subjectivity. So the link or the relation between subjectivity or subject and the origin of language is very, very strong. It continues, because language alone is the real basis in its reality, which is that of being, of the concept of ego. So it's almost the same as what it was expressed in the first sentence. It's just an explanation to the premise. Because language alone is the real basis. So it is the language that made us subject, because we say I. As soon as you start saying I, you are using the language. Otherwise, if there was no I, no situation where we would need to say I, there would be no language. Just imagine, you cannot describe the world and forget about yourself. Like the language cannot have started like that. So the idea behind Benveniste's claim is the language was born when we started saying I. And the next sentence that you can see, which is est ego qui dit ego. Is ego whoever says ego. So this is reminiscent of the idea, I think, therefore I am, of Descartes. So like the meaning of life, ultimately, what does it mean to be I, myself? What we know that when we die, nothing of a person, nothing of the elements we know of a person will remain. And of course, philosophers took up this challenge explaining what life was about. And this is how Descartes got to the conclusion, I think, therefore I am, which means thinking is what makes us live, or is the proof that we live. It's not because we move, it's just because we think. Now, this sentence by Benveniste, is ego whoever says ego, just means I speak, therefore I am. And that's what Lyons wrote in 1982. Well, he said, what Benveniste wrote, ego qui dit ego, just means I speak, therefore I am. Of course, Lyons criticized the Benveniste approach, and he said that we cannot go this far and explain everything like Descartes tried to explain the meaning of life by substituting, or by to explain the language, the origin of language, I speak, therefore I am. But that was the idea behind Benveniste's claim. So language came to exist because we said someone said I, like humanity or whoever started was starting to be aware of their position inside the environment. Now, this goes against the idea that awareness comes from outside, like we are not aware of ourselves, we are aware of others first. Like if you see a baby interacting with objects, with people, that baby is not aware of herself or himself, but they were well aware of what was surrounding them. So this is in psychology. It is through socialization that babies or people get to be aware of themselves. Now, Benveniste here is just saying exactly the contrary, and he said it very explicitly that we were aware of ourselves first before we were aware of others. So here we go, the I and the you, these are the two subjects, even if they are in the same sentence as you as a grammatical subject, but it still has the first degree subjectivity belongs to I, and the second degree subjectivity belongs to you. And you is a grammatical object in a sentence. So use of je, which means I by contrast with you. This is how subjectivity arises. And this is the idea of Benveniste's subjectivity. So he says only I and you have the status of person, as I mentioned earlier. He, she are non-person. Now, this was taken over by generativists or linguists operating with the generative models following Chomsky or different thoughts proposed by Chomsky. Now, in generative linguistics, we are not talking only about pronouns, but these pronouns were broken down into features. You have many schools of thought within the generative model, and most of them are now not talking about pronouns as entities, but as clusters of features. For example, a pronoun I is composed of a person, gender, it may or may not be expressed, number, whether it is plural or singular, and of course, what makes it a noun or a determiner, which means D or category feature. And we can dig again deeper and find other features. Actually, when we are trying to explain something, we dig and we add something because we need it. And because it's not like clinical psychology, you have to prove it. It's rather like maths. When we do maths, you cannot prove anything, but the math is correct. Like you're ending with a theorem or a theory that will explain something. So this is the difference between biology and math. So linguistics, generative linguistics operates like math rather than like biology, because it's not something that you can prove, but it's something that explains the whole system. Like you provide an explanation to explain something, a phenomenon in your language, and it will explain the same phenomenon in many languages. So there is no way we should get rid of this adding features. We keep them because we are able to explain language facts with them. So the idea, you cannot postulate, you cannot hypothesize that the pronoun he or she has a person feature. That's what generative grammar says. And this is this idea. Those who put forward this idea in generative grammar were citing Benveniste. They were saying that he was right when he postulated this. But it took years. At the beginning, he was just considered like, hey, come on, don't fool us. Are you saying that she and he are not a person? But now all generativists are saying that he and she, third person, is a non-person. So they introduced the new feature, which is called minus person or non-person. So we need that feature because it operates as a binary whether you have the value plus or the value minus makes a difference on how you explain the facts that you are investigating. So Benveniste concluded with the polarity of persons, I and you, are specific to language. And he says you cannot find such a contrast or a polarity in anything else in the world. It's only in the language that you can find it. And this is the claim that it lends more support to the idea that language came when we uttered I, when we started using I in sentences. This is how we were aware of the language, and then this is how language developed. So je, I, as a means of actualizing the person status. When you say I, it means you exist. If you are not aware of yourself, you cannot say I. So whether it is I think, therefore I am, or I speak, therefore I am, it amounts to the same thing, because you are actualizing your status as a person. But when you say she or he, you are not doing that. When you are saying she or he, the person you are talking about is not aware of he or she in that sentence. That person is not here, is not even aware of the fact that somebody is talking about them. So this is the non-person. But we still need to mention people who are not with us, other than I and you. We still need to say he, she, or they, if it is plural. But these pronouns have a non-person status. So the contrast is not between I and the rest of the society, as I mentioned earlier, or between the individual and the society. When I said that babies, even if babies were aware of the environment before they became aware of themselves, as we all experienced, and we were not aware of that, even with that fact, it's still, the contrast is between I and you. So we are aware of the language once we contrast I and you, not I and the rest of the society or the environment. So this is the idea of Benveniste. So he ultimately expressed this self-awareness, which is a psychological statement. Self-awareness does not arise from the transition experience from the individual to the totality, which means society, or vice versa, but from this duality, I versus you, through a dual relationship expressed through language in an utterance situation, in a situation where I is speaking with you or is talking to you. So if I don't have this I, if I'm not aware, then the self-awareness is not there. Now, the other alternative to explain the origin of language, as I mentioned, what is the source of language? Some says that it is biological, it is encoded in us, genetically encoded. And then once all the factors or conditions are united, then it happens, then the language takes place or is ready to be expressed using external languages. And if the conditions or the factors, whether they're biological or environmental, are not there, then that faculty of language will not be expressed. So we do not know whether animals have that faculty of language, but lack the factors or the conditions in order for them to express it. And we don't lose hope. If that's the case, then we might get to a point in time where even animals, if the conditions are fulfilled, will be able to express this faculty of language faculty. So it is biological. The source of language is biological. And this is what Steven Pinker and Chomsky have been saying. It is pragmatics, like Jack and Dove, for example, and Lyons. Sorry, the S is missing here. So these are two prominent linguists who are saying that it is a construction. Language is our representation of the world. So we see this view is way different from the one expressed by Benveniste. However, it is still related to pragmatics because Benveniste mentioned the utterance. And when you utter, when you say I in a sentence, it means you are just translating the environment. You are positioning yourself in the environment. So there is a bit of both in Benveniste's idea. There is this, what we can relate to biological source and this pragmatic. So it is an interaction between these two. Yeah, subjectivity combined with pragmatics. This is Benveniste's view. Now we can see this idea in this sentence from Benveniste. Language is only possible because each speaker positions as a subject referring to themselves as I in their speech. So this is the idea that I have been repeating almost since the beginning. Now, there is in subjectivity, there is subject, but when we say utterance, what are the conditions for utterance to take place? We need time, and of course we need space. So there is a subject, the space where you are located, because if you say here and there, the sentence is different. If you say now and then, the sentence is also different, whether you are using, so these are related to the subject. When you say here, you are delimiting the space or with respect to the subject, to yourself. If you say there, it means far from the person who is talking. If you say over there, if the person who is talking says over there, and here, so all this time and space are essential elements of subjectivity. So subjectivity is not only about subject, but it is also about time and space. And now this is why if you Google subjectivity, you will find hundreds, thousands, millions of works done in different universities across worldwide. What are these works about? Well, it is about subjectivity, but most of them are about space and time, or elements in the language that indicate space and time, like here, there, this, that. These are demonstratives which are investigated, but also in verbs, for example, when you say someone returned, the verb return. In French, you cannot use return in both directions. If I am in Ottawa and I'm going to Toronto, and then I will return to Ottawa, and then I can return to Toronto. So I'm originally in Ottawa. So my first move was from Ottawa to Toronto. So I can say in either direction, I can still use return in English, right? I'm returning to Toronto tomorrow, and I'm returning to Ottawa the day after tomorrow. In French, you can't say that. In French, you have to use a different verb. Return, it's only to the place where you are originally, or where you were. So, retourner et revenir, right? Je vais retourner à Toronto et revenir à Ottawa. So retourner is, sorry, it is not the place where you are originally, it's the place where you moved to, right? So we need two verbs where in English, we use the same, return. So the difference, in order to say the difference is, retourner is to go back, and revenir is to come back. And sometimes you need to use this explicitly in English in order to remove the ambiguity. So to come back and to go back, these are retourner et revenir in French. So as you see, and you have them in many different, in many languages. And sometimes you just add an element to particle that indicates the direction of the move. And this is what is encoded in these verbs. So time and space, of course, even space, not only time. Well, time we knew that a long time ago. Like when we say I was there and I am here. One is the past and the other one is the present tense. But space in a verb, like just return, retourner et revenir in French. So this is something new that was investigated when subjectivity came in. So I, as always, related to here and now, unlike any other linguistic object which are not. Like, for example, if you say I, you are talking about here and now, right? But if you say she or he, a man, a woman, or a tree, or an animal, we are not talking about here and now. We are just talking about that entity. So I, there is more to the I than meets the I. The first I is the pronoun, and the second I is when you see it, right? So in I, there is, yes, there is the pronoun, there is the person, there is time, and there is space. And it's the same with you, the pronoun you. There is a person because I'm talking to someone who's physically here. And there is time because it's now. And there is space because I'm talking to you because you are here, all right? At least you can hear me, right? We're in the same virtual world now. So, which is not the case with she or he. When I say she or he, there is no now and there is no here, right? It's only, there is not even a person, it's a non-person. It's to refer to something who is not here. Now, present as time of speech also, when we say time, it is really the present tense. It's not the past, it's not the future. So future and past are like just like she and he, and present tense is like I and you. So these are related. So the time or the tense that is encoded in these pronouns is the subject. It is not the past, it is not the future. So present as time of speech coincides with the time of the event. It is speech internal, while the other tenses are speech external. So future and past are speech external. So this is a very, very important conclusion due to which we owe Benveniste, because who would say that the element I would have these features: present, here, and now, and person. Now, I will keep for the conclusion, what did transformational linguistics do with these elements? And you will be surprised. So even when the time of the event is past, the pronoun I and you are always associated with the time of speech. So if I say, yesterday I went to, what is important to subjecthood is not the time yesterday I went, it's not the past tense. What is important to subjecthood is the time of speech, which means now. So there is this time of the event and the time of speech. Now, why is subjectivity important in linguistic studies? Well, because thanks to subjectivity, we got to the conclusion that she and he are not a person. They do not have a person feature. Thanks to subjectivity, we know that the subject, the pronouns I and you contain time and they contain space. Now, time and person are investigated in generative grammar. They were adopted in generative grammar. Everybody is talking about time and person. For example, time and in person are expressed in a category, a grammatical, a functional category that is called inflection, which means a verb can be inflected for a person. When you conjugate a verb, that's what you are doing. you're unfolding the features or inflecting the verb showing the person and the time or tense. So if you say I went or she leaves, of course English has less morphological morphemes or features than other languages like Spanish or Italian, which has more, for example, or even other languages. So the idea is, of course, when you say she walks, you're expressing the third person with the S. And when you say she went or she left, or she played, you're expressing the past tense. And in some languages, you can express both, and but universally, they are always there, even if they are not expressed morphologically. And another way of, so inflection, this INF is a functional category. Like if you had the opportunity to see how linguistic trees look like, you will realize that there is inflection, and then there is a predicate, and there is the subject, and there is the verb, and then there is the object. So inflection is a category. It is there. It is in the structure of the sentence, in the structure of the verb. And also agreement as like a layer, as a projection, or as a node in the syntactic tree. So you can, it's not only about verb, object, and subject, but also you have some functional categories which dominate at the sentence level and which refer to these elements. So this subjectivity is important because it unfolded all these. So this is how the idea of subjectivity, or the features encoded in subjectivity, was transferred to generative grammar, but nobody is saying that it comes from there. Just like psychoanalysis, when you read psychology or philosophy, you will find elements of psychoanalysis transferred to another field. And the same, like in a syntactic tree, you will see T, which means time. So you have inflection if you are saying that time and the agreement are together as a bundle of features and you express them as inflection. If you want to separate them and say, okay, I'm just seeing agreement here, like the subject agrees with the verb, but I don't see time. And if you see only time, you don't see agreement. So you can use either of these options. And also person. Now recently, person, when I say recently, at least in the last 15 years, person is also postulated as a functional category. You can also see aspect as a functional category. So this is the idea of features. Subjectivity is composed of multiple features, not only the subject. Now, and this is a surprise, space has never been hypothesized as a head category. And I'm certain that many things may be explained in much better way if we postulate space as a functional category instead, or to complement inflection, agreement, time, and person, because the idea of subjectivity being composed of many hidden features is correct. And I will end by saying that now, when we talk about subjectivity, if you Google subjectivity, you will not see these elements. You will see them in generative grammar, but in pragmatics or traditional linguistics, descriptive or structuralism or functionalism, it is the space, and especially space, that is investigated. And modality, and I will end with this, modality, for example, I can say you may want to check before you submit. You may want. What does the verb may convey here? It conveys the idea of a suggestion. I'm suggesting something, right? But if I say she may be there, or she might be there, she may not be there, it is not a suggestion. I'm saying, I believe, it is a belief. I believe she's there. She may be there. She may have left, right? So this is what subjectivity investigates in these fields away from generative grammar. And of course, in generative grammar, you will have these, you will also have these deictics, like what I have just mentioned, and the idea of return return to the place where you were originally. So these are all the elements that are investigated in works that tackle this topic, subjectivity. Okay, now space, as I said, space has never been hypothesized as a hard category. Let's dig a little bit more before we finish. How does Benveniste see the role of space? And it is expressed in this paragraph. What does I, so this is not a slash, it is I in italics. What does I then refer to, he asks the question. Something very, so he starts with I, right? Something very singular, which is exclusively linguistics. I, the element, the pronoun I, refers to the individual act of speech where it is pronounced. So this where it is pronounced is related to space, although it is ultimately a sentence that expresses it, and it designates the speaker. It is a term which can only be identified in what we have elsewhere named situation of utterance. So situation of utterance is related to here and now. As I said, when I say she went yesterday or she left yesterday, it is not left that is important here. It is not the past tense that is important. It is what I'm saying. The sentence is, I'm saying the sentence now. The event was yesterday, she left yesterday, but the sentence is taking place now. So named situation of utterance and whose reference corresponds to here and now. So again here, space, and now is the tense. He called this référence actuelle. This is my translation, référence actuelle. The reality to which I refers is the reality of the utterance. So the example that I gave, she went or she left yesterday. So the reality is not the event itself, it is the utterance, if we consider subjectivity. It is in this situation of utterance where I, the pronoun I, designates the utterer, the person who speaks, that such a utterer announces itself as the subject. So when I say she left yesterday, I am positioning myself as a subject. It is not the pronoun she or he, which is important with respect to subjectivity. So conclusion, the role of space has been overlooked. Subjectivity is composed of person, situation of utterance, time and space. If both person and time are postulated as head categories projecting at the sentence level, then there is no reason why space should be left out. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we do have quite a few questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but hopefully we can address at least most of them. So the first question we have from earlier on was, is Charles Hockett's design feature of reflexiveness similar to the concept of actualization as mentioned earlier?
Could you please repeat the sentence? I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
sure. So is Charles Hockett's design feature of reflexiveness similar to the concept of actualization?
Reflexiveness is an object that becomes, that coincides with the subject. So it is more related to the object rather than the subject.
Okay, and we have another question here. So someone's asking, what is the ideal choice if they want to revisit syntax after a long period? So if they're trying to get back into it, if you have a recommendation.
Like to revisit syntax, someone who has left syntax for a long period of time and they want a recommendation?
Yeah.
It depends what kind of linguistics they were in before they left, right? So if they were in generative linguistics, for example, I would rather suggest a journal, because you can find, like, for example, linguistic inquiry. In any volume, you will find a series of articles, and that gives you an idea of where they have gotten by now, rather than a book. So if I left syntax for a long period of time and I'm returning, I'm not going to look for a book, I'm going to look for a journal, because I will find a series of articles, and that will give me a better idea of where linguistics has got so far.
Okay. Another question is an example and asking if you could clarify. So their example is, if they were to say Bonveniste was going there, according to Bonveniste, is Bonveniste a subject here?
No, it's I. It's the person who utters the. If we are talking about subjectivity, it is the person who utters the sentence who is the subject.
Okay. And another
because
question.
Where is the subjectivity? If the event is true, the event may be true or may be false or wrong, right? So the information encoded in the sentence may be accurate or false, but the utterance is always accurate because the person has uttered that sentence. So the subject of the utterance is always I.
Okay. Another question, is there really a difference between American English and British English?
Oh, of course, of course.
And also, if you could please elaborate more on subjectivity as self-awareness.
Yeah, when I said, when the people were aware of language when they started using I, this is the idea of, this is the Benveniste's idea with respect to subjectivity. So he says that the beginning of language is when people were aware of the pronoun I. So whether it was Adam or whether it was Eve or whether it was someone before that, language came to exist only when they were aware of the, there was this self-awareness. And this goes against the trend that says that language is learned from the environment, right? So Benveniste was saying that language became possible because we said I speak, therefore I am.
What about sentences such as I love you, where a person is speaking to himself or herself? Is that you in the sentence a person?
Okay, so if someone says I loved you or I love you and they are talking to themselves,
yes,
they are both subjects because it's the total, it's the psychic unity that I mentioned in the presentation. So, and when I said it is weird because we're saying that the object, the grammatical object seen from the subjectivity is also a subject because it is the same person, right?
okay. And another question, is connotative or denotative meaning or words affected by subjectivity?
Denoted and connotated means something that we added, and denoted is something that we deciphered. So I don't see the, whether they are, how they are related to subjectivity.
Okay.
I don't see how they are related to subjectivity.
And then we also have somebody asking if you could.
Sorry, it's not I don't see how they are related to subjectivity. If I stay with the content that they have covered, right? Because of course now any verb or pair of verbs, you can dig inside and see how they are, how subjectivity is connotated in this, how subjectivity is encoded in these verbs. I'm not saying that it is not related, just it's not something that I have covered.
One person's asking if you could clarify once again why Benveniste compares ego to subjectivity.
Ego, because self-awareness is ego. So this is just like a synonym. Ego has come to mean self-awareness. It's not like egoistically or well, somehow it is, right? Once we are aware of yourself, then you try to draw the blanket towards yourself because you're aware of yourself. So that's what ego, the relation between ego and egoism or egoistically.
One person is asking for your opinion on whether this language subjectivity applies to governing bodies of grammar lessons in elementary and secondary levels of education.
I wouldn't think so. Like secondary, no, it has to be something that is investigated when we start to tackle linguistics or other disciplines such as philosophy or so the higher in secondary school, for example, you are learning the basics. At some point, of course, once things have been clarified and unfolded, we might see the interest to teach them earlier, but I don't foresee this now, personally.
So I think we'll go with just two more questions. There's a lot of questions coming in. So the first one is, in the sentence, he is going there, if the third person he is present and hears the statement, would this affect subjectivity?
He is still the subject is still the person who is uttering the sentence, no matter. So it is we only say that here the present tense coincides with the tense of the event and the tense of utterance are the same. They are both present. But still, subjectivity here is from the side of the person who uttered the sentence, because it is that person who uttered the sentence that can add judgment or evaluate or change the perspective of the sentence. It's not the event itself. The event doesn't change, right? It may be true, it may be false, but it is the utterance that is related to subjectivity.
Okay. And one more question before we end. Someone here is asking, is there any relation between language relativity and subjectivity?
Yes, it's weird because I thought of that when I was doing this presentation. Yes, when you say, for example, it is me who did this. Now, who is related to me? Because who is a relative pronoun and me is a pronoun. A relative pronoun has to have an antecedent. So when you say me and who are the same, how can you explain that? Well, you can explain this by getting back to the features that constitute subjectivity. If we say that they share subject, person, time, and space. So this is how I thought about it, and I'm so surprised that this question came.
Okay, so I think that's all the time we have for questions. There's a lot of questions here that we won't have a chance to address, but I just wanted to say thank you again, Dr. Achab, for giving your presentation on language subjectivity. I see here a lot of positive feedback. A lot of people have learned, and I'm sure we've learned quite a lot too. So thank you again for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us.